This section is going to be devoted to the box model. You might wonder what the box model is, so let me start by giving you a quick introduction. The whole point of CSS is to get the appearance of elements in a web page exactly right. CSS is all about getting the little details right, like the spacing between elements and so on. This also is one of the most annoying parts of working with CSS. I've known plenty of CSS programmers or web programmers struggling to get elements to show up exactly where they want with just the right spacing between different parts of the web page. This is exactly where the box model helps out. By the end of this section, you will know exactly how to specify the padding and the margins which determine spacing between different elements in a web page. Let's take a really simple bit of HTML and see how this is going to be handled by the browser. This is a very simple paragraph tag. How does the browser view this element? It does so as a series of boxes. Concentric boxes, in fact. The innermost of these boxes is what we will refer to as the content box. This tightly surrounds the actual content which is displayed on screen. By the way, I should clarify that the names of these concentric boxes are made up. It's not like these are official JavaScript names. I am just coming up with them here for ease of explanation. Returning to our boxes, the content box is the innermost box. It tightly bounds the content. Then there is another virtual box around this box. Let's call it the padding box. The padding box is still a part of the P HTML element, but it includes some space outside of the content box. There is one last box around the padding box, again a concentric box. Let's call it the margin box. The margin box is outside the P element. This is the margin, or think of it as the inter-element space. If we put all of these three concentric boxes together, we can see in one view that there is the innermost box, which we've referred to as the content box. Just outside that is what we called the padding box. And lastly, enclosing both of these is the margin box. Once again, the names of these boxes are just names that I have come up with for ease of explanation. Even so, remember these names because they will tie back to the CSS and they will tie back to the CSS syntax, which we are going to get to in just a moment. Let's now see what these boxes translate to when the HTML is rendered by the browser. Here is our P HTML element rendered to screen without any rules around it, without any styles. All that we now have is the content box. The content box tightly surrounds the content, does not include either the padding or the margin. Let's now add our first style. This is the first bit of CSS that we've spoken about so far. We specify the padding to be 12 pixels. And lo and behold, we now see that the rendering has changed just a little bit. Specifically, there is now space around the content. And how much is that space? Well, the browser has interpreted the style that we created to be a padding of 12 pixels on every side. And that's what it goes ahead and creates. It adds a padding of 12 pixels on the top, bottom, left and right. In every one of these four directions, a padding of 12 pixels is added. That was what we introduced by adding a rule where we specified that the padding property should be 12 pixels. Note that in this example, we only specified one value for the padding property, the 12 pixel value. It is also possible to explicitly specify different paddings in each of the four directions. Here, we've now entered four numbers, each of them being 12 pixels. These will be interpreted by the browser in a specific order. They'll be interpreted to mean the top, right, bottom, and then left padding. Every one of these is marked to be exactly 12 pixels, just as before. We could also specify different values for each of these four paddings. For instance, in the next example now on screen, we've specified that the top and bottom padding should be 24 pixels, while the side padding on both the right and the left should be only 12 pixels. There's more. You can actually reduce redundancy even further by just specifying two numbers. If you do that, the browser will interpret this as being 24 pixels for both the top and the bottom padding and 12 pixels for the right and the left padding. And lastly, there actually are explicit different property names for the padding on top, right, bottom and left. These four property names are all derived by simply tacking on top, right, bottom and left onto the word padding. If the padding box could be modified or controlled by using a style where we use the padding property, what property do you think we would use to control the margin box? Well, it's not a very hard question to answer. We would use the margin property. And that's what you see now on screen. We have specified an additional property. This is the margin property, which has a value of 6 pixels. This may not seem immediately apparent. It might not seem like there's anything new in the way it's been rendered, but if you pay close attention, you will find that the margin of 6 pixels has actually been added. This margin of 6 pixels is now being added in addition to the padding of 12 pixels that surrounds the content box. So we have the innermost box, which is the content box. Then we have a padding of 12 pixels, which is applied on all four dimensions: top, bottom, right, left. And lastly, in addition to the padding, we have a 6 pixel margin, which is applied outside the padding box. Let's return to my original question. Did this margin change the rendering of the HTML in any way? It's not completely clear from what you see on screen now that it has, but we can see the exact effect of the margin by adding a background color. Let's add a background color and then see how this HTML shows up on screen. The effect of the margin property or the margin style will then be a lot more clear. We now add a rather garish and unappealing background color of aquamarine, and we are now immediately able to tell the effect of the padding and the margin properties. The margin is outside the element that we are governing using this style. It is inside the parent element, however. Note that the background color on the P tag here explicitly does not include the margin because the margin is not a part of the P tag. Remember that the margin is not a part of the element being governed by the style, and this also means that the border width that we specify is not going to be a part of the margin. Again, the border is a part of the element that we are governing, which is the P tag, and so like the padding, this is going to be internal to the element, whereas the margin is external to the element. The border includes the padding, but it does not include the margin, which is exactly as you would expect it to be. Let's also talk about these other border attributes, starting with the border color. You can specify the color of the border, the width of the border, which we've set to be 3 pixels, and also the border style. By the way, quick word that in addition to specifying the border in terms of pixels, you might also use the words thin, medium, or thick. Different browsers would interpret these differently. The border style can be solid, dashed, dotted, groove, etc. Remember the difference between padding and margin because this is quite important to getting the right look and feel on your websites. Padding is within an element, border is between two elements, and so is outside any given element. We've already discussed how it's possible to specify the padding individually in all 4 directions. This is also true of the margin. If you specify 4 numbers, they will be interpreted in order as the top, right, bottom, and left. As before, it's possible to specify these values to be different for the top, right, bottom, and left, as you can see in this example on screen, where we specified that the top and bottom borders should be 24 pixels, while the right and left borders should be only 12 pixels. We can also further reduce the redundancy by just specifying 2 numbers. The first of these will be interpreted as the top and bottom border. The second of these will be interpreted as the right and left border. And exactly as before, it's also possible to specify these using 4 individual properties, which are created by tacking on the dimension name to the word margin. Here you can see that we have 4 individual properties set as margin top, margin bottom, margin right, and margin left. All of this also applies to the border property. I won't belabor the point in quite as much detail, but you should know that you could set border left, color, width, and style, just as you could set border right, color, width, and style, and border top, color, width, and style, and border bottom, color, width, and style. One last word about borders. Borders can also have rounded corners, and the way in which you achieve this is by specifying a border radius property. In fact, CSS offers so much control that you could individually specify the radius of every one of the different corners. If you would like a specific radius for, say, your top right border, well, that's possible too. You would use the border top right radius and set it to 32 pixels as you see now on screen. Top right indicates that it's the top right corner that's going to receive this value. And one last bit of CSS shorthand that we should remember, it's possible to combine the style, color, and thickness in just one property. If you specify 3 values, CSS will interpret this to be the style, the width, and the color, one after another. Any one of these is optional, and you could leave any one of them out and still have a valid CSS border style.